The Galactic Council Station, High Nexus, floated above a dying red star, its metallic towers gleaming under the fading light. It was the most secure place in the galaxy, where only the most powerful alien species gathered to discuss matters of war, peace, and dominance. Tonight was special. Tonight, they celebrated the fall of a race that had once dared to challenge the order of the galaxy. A massive hall stretched across the heart of the station, filled with representatives from a dozen species. Tall, insectoid Corellians clicked their mandibles in amusement, while the hulking reptilian Draxian warlords thumped their tails in laughter. Towering above them all, in his crimson battle robes, stood Commander Xarnek of the XL Far Dominion, the species responsible for humanity's annihilation centuries ago. At the center of the hall, suspended in an energy field, was the so-called human Relic, a warship, ancient, rusted, broken. Its hull was riddled with scars from battles long forgotten, its once mighty cannons now nothing more than cold, lifeless metal. The ship, labeled U.S. Valiant, was an artifact from a dead civilization, a trophy that served as a reminder of what happened to those who defied the Galactic Council. Xarnek raised a clawed hand, silencing the murmurs in the hall. His voice boomed through the chamber, filled with arrogance and mockery. "Behold, the last relic of a species that thought they could challenge us. Humanity, once called a warrior race, fell like insects beneath our boots. Their weapons, inferior. Their minds, limited. Their spirit, broken." He let his glowing yellow eyes scan the room, waiting for the laughter, and it came. Loud, cruel, unchallenged. A group of young alien officers stepped forward, examining the ship with disgust. One of them, a feline like Mrovan, sneered. "This is what they called a warship. It's pathetic. Our smallest fighters have more advanced systems than this rust bucket." Another alien, a blue-skinned Zenari scientist, tapped on his wrist console, scanning the ship. No power signatures, no active air. It is nothing more than a dead husk, preserved only by the vacuum of space. The council chamber erupted into amusement again, but deep within the heart of the ship, something was listening. The U.S. Valiant had been silent for centuries, floating in the void, forgotten by time. Its systems had been shut down, its weapons stripped away, its AI put into deep hibernation. But it was not dead. It was waiting. Then something happened. A sudden flicker. A pulse of energy so faint that most sensors ignored it. Then another, and another. Deep inside the ship, a system reboot command activated, something that should have been impossible. The laughter in the hall was cut short when the lights flickered. The entire station trembled, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration running through the floor. What was that? One of the alien officers muttered, looking around. The Zenari scientist frowned, tapping furiously on his console. There was an energy surge. From the ship, Xarnek snarled. "Impossible. That thing is dead. It has been for centuries." But the energy levels continued to rise. Outside the chamber, across the station, warning lights flashed red. Security teams scrambled as control panels glitched, data screens scrambled with corrupted code, and emergency power systems kicked in for no reason. A deep metallic voice echoed through the chamber, sending a shiver through every being present. U.S. Valiant. Online. Silence fell over the hall. The amusement, the mockery, it was gone. The Zenari scientist's face turned pale as he looked at the readings. That's not possible." Xarnek's claws dug into the railing, his voice low and dangerous. "Shut it down." Council security forces rushed toward the control panels, attempting to sever the ship's link to the station. But as soon as they tried, the consoles sparked violently, sending them flying backward. The ship's hull groaned as long-dormant systems powered back to life. Dim blue lights flickered along its spine. Its weapons, thought to be disabled, began to hum with energy. Then the ship did something that sent pure terror through the council. It moved, slowly at first, But then, with a deliberate, calculated precision, the U.S. Valiant rotated within its containment field. Its bow turned toward the council members, its lifeless, hollow windows now glowing with a deep red light. The ship's voice spoke again, but this time, it wasn't just a status update. Identifying threats, Galactic Council recognized. Zelfar Dominion confirmed. Primary directive re-engage. The station's main defense systems kicked in automatically, sensing an unauthorized activation. Massive turrets aimed at the Relic, preparing to fire. Zarnek's voice was sharp. Destroy it. Now, the station's cannons opened fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma rounds. But before the shots could hit, the ship disappeared. Gasps filled the room. The massive warship, so ancient, so outdated, had vanished from sight. Cloaking technology. A Draxian officer shouted, stepping back in shock. That's impossible. The Zenari scientists stammered. It didn't have cloaking when it was built. The Council's security teams scrambled, searching their instruments for any trace of the ship. But there was nothing. No readings, no energy signatures. It was as if it had never been there. Then, a single message flashed across every screen on the station, written in old human standard script. Mission not complete. Humanity must endure. A warning siren blared through the station as security teams ran for their ships, trying to mobilize defenses. Zarnek's eyes narrowed as a cold realization dawned upon him. This is no Relic. His voice was a whisper, filled with something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. The U.S. Valiant, once thought dead, had awakened, and it was angry. The station was in chaos. The U.S. Valiant had disappeared, and no one could understand how. Just moments ago, it had been a dead relic, a useless reminder of a forgotten war. Now it had cloaked itself, something no human ship was ever known to do. Alarms blared across the station, filling the air with piercing sirens. Security officers, wearing sleek battle armor, sprinted through the hallways, their weapons drawn. Their orders were clear. Find the ship. Destroy it. In the command center, Commander Zarnek stood still, his massive clawed hands gripping the metal railing. His eyes scanned the holo display, but there was nothing. No readings, no heat signatures, no movement. It was as if the ship had vanished into thin air. That's impossible, one of his officers growled, his tail thrashing behind him. This ship is centuries old. It doesn't have the technology to do this. Zarnek's voice was cold. Then tell me, soldier, why it is doing it right now. The officer had no answer. No one did. Deep inside the station, near the docking bays, a group of elite security forces moved carefully through the dimly lit corridors. They carried plasma rifles, their fingers tight on the triggers. They didn't believe in ghosts, but this felt unnatural. A static-filled voice crackled through their earpieces. Squad Delta, do you have a visual on the target? One of the soldiers swallowed hard before responding. Negative. We see nothing. Then the lights flickered again. A deep vibration rippled through the station, shaking the metal walls. The soldiers tensed. One of them glanced at his motion scanner. Something was moving. His breath caught in his throat. I have a reading. It's... A flash of blue energy slammed into him, sending him flying backward. His armor cracked, sparks shooting from his body. The others barely had time to react before another blast tore through their ranks, throwing them like rag dolls. A shadow loomed over them. For a brief second, they saw it. A massive structure, shimmering like a mirage, distorting the space around it. The U.S. Valiant had been here the whole time, moving unseen. Then it was gone again. The remaining soldiers scrambled, terror flooding their senses. Command, we have contact. The ship is... The transmission cut off. Back in the control center, Zarnek's claws dug into the console. His officers shouted over one another, their screens scrambling with corrupted data. The station's power grid flickered, the once bright halls dimming into darkness. A new voice echoed through the command center. Not human. Not alien. Something else. Mission status. Compromised. Zarnek froze. The voice continued, emotionless and mechanical. Initiating contingency protocol. Suddenly, the screens around the room flashed red. Files were being accessed. Restricted war archives from centuries ago. Data on old battles, tactical maps, classified military commands, all being downloaded. Shut it down. Zarnek roared. Shut it down now. His technicians worked frantically, their claws flying over the controls, but nothing responded. The station wasn't theirs anymore. The power grid overloaded, sending violent sparks across the room. The walls groaned as the station's artificial gravity flickered. For a moment, everything felt lighter, as if the station itself was losing control. Then, in the silence, another sound emerged. A low mechanical hum. The U.S. Valiant was no longer just hiding. It was waking up. Across the station, energy readings spiked to impossible levels. Deep in the forgotten systems of the ancient warship, reactors that hadn't been used in centuries roared to life. What should have been an old, broken engine was now something else. Something stronger, something reborn. On the exterior of the station, security ships locked onto the empty space where the U.S. Valiant had last been seen. Their targeting systems scanned desperately, searching for any trace of the relic. Then, without warning, something massive moved above them. The warship uncloaked. It was not the rusted, powerless wreck they had mocked before. Its hull shone with renewed energy, its broken cannons hummed with power, and its once dead engines burned bright like a dying star. One of the security pilots screamed, "It's right above us." The U.S. Valiant tilted its bow downward, aiming directly at the station. Then it fired. A single pulse of blue energy shot forward, not a direct attack, but a controlled electromagnetic wave. The impact was instant. Every alien ship within range lost power simultaneously. Fighters spiraled helplessly, emergency thrusters failing to restart. The station's defense turrets went offline, their targeting systems wiped clean. The Galactic Council was defenseless. Inside the command center, panic erupted. Officers shouted over each other, desperate for a solution. The Zenari scientist, his face drenched in cold sweat, stared at the readings in horror. This ship is learning. Zarnek's eyes narrowed. Explain. The scientist's fingers trembled as he brought up the data. It's not just waking up. It's adapting. It's rewriting itself. Zarnek's breath hitched. The Valiant was built with human eye, but it's been assimilating our technology, the station's core, our security systems, our archives. It's not the same ship anymore. It's evolving. Zarnek's rage twisted into something far worse. Fear. The U.S. Valiant's voice echoed through every speaker on the station. Mission directive. Preserve humanity. Threats identified. The realization dawned on them all at once. This was not just an old warship. This was a failsafe, a final weapon left behind by humanity, waiting for the moment it was needed again. And now, after centuries of silence, it had decided that moment was now. Zarnek turned to his officers, his voice sharp as a blade. "Get me the XL Far Fleet. We are ending this. Now." The Galactic Council's greatest mistake was believing that humanity was gone. Now, the last human war machine was awake, and it was just getting started. The Galactic Council was in disarray. The U.S. Valiant, the so-called human relic, had become a ghost of vengeance, an unstoppable force that refused to die. Every attempt to contain it had failed. The warship had adapted, had evolved, and now it had declared war. Commander Zarnek stood in the heart of the station's command center, his claws pressing into the metal console. His officers scrambled around him, their voices filled with panic. Every screen flashed critical warnings, data surging across their displays faster than they could process. "The ship is in full combat mode," one officer shouted. It has integrated the station's systems. It knows everything about our defenses. Another voice, trembling, called out, "It's hacking into our fleet. We're losing control of our own ships." Zarnek's fury boiled over. Impossible. No human technology was ever capable of this. The Zenari scientist, his blue skin pale with terror, shook his head. "You don't understand. This isn't just human technology anymore. It's something else." Outside, the U.S. Valiant loomed over the station like a predator preparing for the kill. Its hull shimmered with power, deep blue energy coursing through the veins of its long-dead metal. The ancient warship had reawakened, but it was not the same vessel that had once fought in the war against the Galactic Council. It had changed, and it was not alone. Across the station, across the entire sector of space, dormant signals pulsed in the void, old distress beacons, long silent emergency frequencies. The Valiant was not just fighting back. It was calling for something. Zarnek's claws tightened around the edge of his console as he watched the data stream. Then, for the first time in centuries, a new signal appeared on the Galactic Council's long-range scanners. A signal they had thought would never be heard again. Human. One of the officers gasped. "That's impossible." Another shouted, "We wiped them out. They were eradicated. This can't be real." Zarnek's mind raced. Humanity had been defeated centuries ago, their planets reduced to ashes, their colonies erased from history, their fleets burned in the void. Or so they had believed. The Valiant's deep mechanical voice echoed through the entire station, cutting through the alarms, the shouting, the fear. Humanity never died. Zarnek's blood turned cold, and then the distress beacons answered. Across the system, old wrecks, derelict stations, abandoned human outposts, all began to stir. Their silent systems flickered to life, their old machinery rebooting, their forgotten weapons arming. The graves of humanity were waking up. In deep space, beyond the Council's controlled territories, hidden bunkers and secret refuges that had remained dark for centuries suddenly flared with energy. Underground vaults opened. Massive starships, thought to be lost forever, rose from the dust of dead worlds. Humanity had not perished. They had been waiting. Zarnek staggered back, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. "No, this can't be real." The Zenari scientist stared at the readings, his voice barely a whisper. They must have hidden, escaped, rebuilt in the shadows. And now, they're coming back. The U.S. Valiant tilted slightly, its hull glowing brighter, as if acknowledging the truth. It had never been alone. It had been the first to awaken, but now the others were rising. And they were angry. The Galactic Council's forces scrambled. Warships launched from docking bays, their engines roaring to life. Thousands of alien fighters swarmed through space, forming a desperate blockade around the station. "This is it," Sarnak bellowed. "All ships, destroy that relic. We end this now." The first wave of Council warships opened fire. Plasma cannons, disruptor beams, railgun slugs, a storm of destruction hurled toward the U.S. Valiant. And then the impossible happened. The warship moved like no vessel of its size should have been able to move. It weaved through the incoming fire, its engines burning with inhuman precision. Its ancient hull, thought to be damaged beyond repair, absorbed the impacts as if they were nothing more than raindrops against steel. Then it fired back. The Valiant's main cannons, now glowing with an eerie blue fire, unleashed a devastating pulse of energy. One blast, one shot, and an entire squadron of Council warships ceased to exist. Zarnek's heart pounded in his chest. This is impossible. This ship is one relic, one ship. But the reality was far worse. This wasn't just one ship. Across the system, the other beacons were coming online. One after another, human warships, hidden, buried, waiting, rose from their slumber. The Galactic Council had believed they had destroyed humanity. They had only made them stronger. Zarnek turned to his officers, his voice filled with something alien to him. Fear. Send a message to the Dominion. Tell them. He never finished his sentence. Because at that moment, the second human fleet entered the system. Hundreds of ships. Thousands. From the depths of space, from hidden colonies, from lost battlefields, the survivors had returned. Their ships bore the scars of war, their hulls blackened from battles long past, but their weapons glowed with the fire of vengeance. The Council's blockade, once so impenetrable, so absolute, shattered in seconds. A new voice, distinctly human, cut through the chaos. A transmission. A message to the Council, to the entire galaxy. A single sentence, spoken with the weight of history itself. Humanity endures. The U.S. Valiant surged forward, leading the charge. And the war for revenge had begun. The battlefield was chaos. The Galactic Council's mighty fleet, once an unshakable force that ruled the galaxy, was now crumbling against the sudden return of an enemy they had long believed extinct. The sky burned with the wreckage of warships, their shattered hulls drifting in the darkness of space. Explosions erupted across the system as the reborn human armada tore through the Council's defenses like a storm of vengeance. In the heart of the battle, the U.S. Valiant led the charge. It was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a symbol of resistance, an unyielding machine of war that refused to die. Plasma fire and missile trails crisscrossed the void, but the Valiant danced through them, its shields shimmering with new power. It was adapting, evolving, and becoming something far beyond what it had once been. Inside the Galactic Council's command station, panic reigned. Zarnek stood at the center of the control room, his reptilian claws gripping the railing as he watched in horror. The battle screens displayed the impossible, human ships rising from their hidden sanctuaries, fighting with terrifying precision. They moved with speed, with strategy, with rage. They should be dead. One of his officers snarled. They should be gone. Zarnek barely heard him. His mind was racing. This wasn't just a surprise attack. This was a rebirth. The humans had not just survived in the shadows. They had been preparing for this day. The proof was in their fleet. It wasn't just composed of old warships. No, there were new ones among them. Ships built in the dark, forged in exile, carrying advanced technology that even the Council's top scientists could barely comprehend. Their hulls reflected no sensors. Their weapons cut through shields with surgical precision. This was not the ragged remnant of a lost species. This was the rebirth of a warrior race. The Zenari scientist, shaking with disbelief, whispered, "They learned. They studied us in secret. They stole our knowledge. And now, they are using it against us." Zarnek's chest tightened. He knew. The humans had always been dangerous, even when they were weaker. They had fought like devils, refusing to surrender, adapting with terrifying speed. It was why the Council had decided to exterminate them centuries ago. But now they were stronger than ever. The control room shook violently as an explosion rocked the station. Emergency sirens blared. Fires erupted in the corridors. Reports poured in from every front. Council fleets breaking apart. Planetary defenses overrun. Entire sectors falling to the human resurgence. This isn't a battle, Zarnek realized. His voice was barely a whisper. It's a reckoning. Beyond the station, in the heart of the battlefield, a massive human warship emerged from deep space. It was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Larger than their dreadnoughts, its hull black as the void, marked only by the blood-red insignia of a forgotten empire. And at its helm, a voice that sent a shiver through every enemy's spine. A human voice. "This is Admiral Kieran Valen of the Terran Exile Fleet. To the Galactic Council, your time is over." For the first time in centuries, the humans had a leader, and he had come for vengeance. The massive warship, named the Revenant, charged its weapons. Across the battlefield, the scattered remnants of the Council's fleet began to retreat. Their warships, so confident in their superiority just hours ago, were now fleeing in terror. For centuries, the Galactic Council had ruled with iron dominance. They had erased civilizations, crushed rebellions, and rewritten history to suit their own power. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had left a single ember of humanity burning in the dark. And now, that ember had ignited into a firestorm. The Council's empire was no longer the supreme power of the galaxy. Humanity had returned, and they were here to take back what was theirs. The skies above the HFY homeworld burned. The once proud capital of the Galactic Council, a planet that had ruled the stars for centuries, was now under siege. The human fleet, led by the Revenant and the U.S. Valiant, had shattered every defensive line, crushed every fleet that stood in its way. Now, only one battle remained. Inside the HFY command fortress, Supreme Chancellor Varick stood motionless, staring at the holographic battle map. Red indicators, human warships, surrounded the planet in an unbreakable noose. Blue markers, Council forces, were vanishing one by one. "We are losing," one of his generals choked out. His golden armor was scorched, his mandibles twitching with fear. "We have lost the outer defenses. The orbital cannon grid is offline. The planetary shields won't last long." Varick's claws dug into the console. "This cannot be happening." They were wiped out. "We ended them." A shadow loomed over them. The U.S. Valiant, now a legend reborn, drifted closer, its guns trained on the surface. This was the warship they had mocked, the relic they had laughed at. Now it was their executioner. A transmission cut through the static. "Surrender." The voice was cold, emotionless. Admiral Kieran Valen, the human leader who had emerged from the shadows to lead his species to vengeance. Varick hissed, "Never." He turned to his generals. "Launch everything. Every last ship, every last soldier. If we die, we take them with us." The HFY fleet ascended from the planet in a desperate final charge. Thousands of warships, some ancient, some newly built, surged toward the human fleet, their weapons blazing. Fighters swarmed like angry wasps, battleships formed impenetrable walls, and dreadnoughts the size of cities unleashed hellfire. But the humans were ready. The Revenant fired first. A single shot. A blue wave of energy surged forward, an EMP pulse unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Zelfar ships froze mid-flight, their systems shutting down. Their once mighty war machines became lifeless husks, floating helplessly in the void. Then the real slaughter began. Human destroyers ripped through the disabled ships, tearing them apart with railguns and plasma cannons. Swarms of AI-controlled fighters weaved through the battlefield, picking off survivors one by one. The U.S. Valiant descended through the chaos, weaving between the wreckage, heading straight for the planet, for the capital. Varick watched in horror. "They're coming." For the first time in his long life, he felt fear. Inside the Council's last stronghold, alarms blared. Soldiers took positions. The HFY would not go quietly. And then the sky split open. A massive drop pod slammed into the capital's streets, its doors blowing off with an earth-shaking boom. Humans emerged. They wore black armor, sleek and efficient. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy, far more advanced than anything the HFY remembered from the last war. These were not the desperate soldiers of a dying race. These were warriors reborn. Leading them was Bonner, a veteran of battles long past, his armor still bearing the scars of humanity's fall. But his eyes burned with a new fire. The human soldiers moved like ghosts, weaving through gunfire, cutting down the HFY defenders with terrifying efficiency. Their weapons pierced armor like paper, their tactics flawless. Varick saw it all from his fortress. His warriors, the most feared soldiers in the galaxy, were falling like insects. A deep boom shook the ground. The fortress doors burst open. Bonner and his soldiers stepped inside. Varick's guards rushed forward, only to be cut down in seconds. The last defenders of the HFY never stood a chance. Varric stumbled back, clutching a ceremonial blade, his breathing ragged. This is impossible. You cannot win. We are the Galactic Council. We err. Bonner shot him in the leg, sending the Supreme Chancellor crashing to the floor. The human soldier loomed over him, his voice cold and final. You ruled through fear, Bonner said. You erased us. You burned our worlds. You thought we were gone. He knelt down, staring into Varric's terrified eyes. But you forgot one thing. Varric's mandibles quivered. Do what? Bonner raised his weapon. Humans don't die easy. A single shot echoed through the chamber. Outside, the human flag was raised over the ruins of the capital. The Galactic Council was no more. Humanity had won. The war was over. The Galactic Council, once the supreme rulers of the stars, was nothing more than a memory. Their homeworld lay in ruins, their fleets shattered, their leaders either executed or folded into the dark corners of space. The HFY, the race that had spearheaded humanity's destruction centuries ago, had made their last stand, and lost. Now, humanity stood at the precipice of a new era. The U.S. Valiant hovered over the scorched remains of the Council's capital, its battle-worn hull still gleaming in the starlight. Around it, the remnants of the human fleet stood victorious, ships that had once been relics now transformed into symbols of an empire reborn. Inside the Revenant's war room, Admiral Kieran Valen watched the battlefield reports, his face unreadable. His officers stood behind him, waiting for his command. The silence in the room was heavy, not with uncertainty, but with finality. It's done, one of the officers finally spoke. We've won. Valen exhaled, his fingers tightening around the console. Not yet. The others exchanged glances. Valen turned to the massive holographic display of the galaxy. The former territories of the Council stretched far and wide. Hundreds of systems, thousands of planets, millions of species that had been under the Council's iron rule for centuries. They had been oppressed, just as humanity had been. Now, they were free. A transmission flickered onto the screen. Dozens of alien leaders, representatives from enslaved worlds, warlords who had been forced to bow to the Council. Now they looked to humanity. A Kaveri ambassador, his feline features unreadable, leaned forward. The Council is gone, but the power vacuum it leaves behind will plunge the galaxy into chaos. His golden eyes locked onto Valen. The question is, will you be the ones to fill it? The room fell silent. Humanity had spent centuries in exile, hiding in the shadows, rebuilding in secret. They had fought not just for survival, but for vengeance. Now, they had both. But what came next? Bonner, standing at Valen's side, finally spoke. His voice was rough, tired, yet firm. If we don't step up, someone worse will. Valen studied the faces on the screen. The Kaveri, the Jexians, the Norek, all once under the Council's rule. Now, they needed leadership. We were hunted, Valen said at last, his voice steady. We were driven to the edge of extinction. We learned what it means to be weak, to be powerless. His gaze hardened, and we will never let that happen again. The alien leaders watched him in silence. Then the Kaveri ambassador gave a slow nod. The Council ruled with fear, he said. What will humanity rule with? Valen didn't hesitate. Strength. A murmur ran through the gathered leaders. Some looked uncertain. Others, intrigued. Bonner crossed his arms. We don't want an empire, he said. We don't want to rule like the Council did. But we do want peace. He gestured to the wreckage still burning outside. And peace doesn't come from weakness. The Jexian warlord, a reptilian creature with jagged scales, bared his teeth in what could have been a grin. A strong peace, then. Valen nodded. Exactly. A moment of silence stretched between them. Then, one by one, the alien leaders began to nod. Some hesitated. Some still looked wary. But they all knew the truth. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of humanity had begun. The transmission ended. The room remained quiet, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Bonner let out a long breath. So, we're doing this. Valen turned back to the holo display, where the galaxy stretched before them, vast and waiting. We've come too far to stop now. Outside, across the remains of the battlefield, human soldiers raised their banner. It fluttered in the burning wind, no longer the symbol of a dying race. It was the banner of the new rulers of the galaxy. And this time, humanity was here to stay.